In this tutorial, we are going to be learning how to use the magic wand tool, the paint bucket tool, the gradient tool, and the brush tool to fill out a coloring page. We are also going to learn how to use layers to mix in some photographs with our coloring page for a neat effect. The first thing we got to do is we got to find an image we want to color. Wow, I have one here. I'm going to copy that image and come over and click New File. Now that I've clicked New File, you'll notice that when you're making a new image, sometimes you'll get a clipboard size. This is the exact size of my coloring page. So I'm going to use that. I'm going to click Create. I'm going to paste my image in, and there we go. Notice that my pasted image is on its own layer. Next, let's learn about the magic wand tool. The magic wand tool, it can be found along our toolbars on the side. Now let's click something on our coloring page. Notice when I clicked, it selected a large area, but not everything. Let me click another area. Here we go. I'm going to zoom in so we can get a better look at that. The magic wand tool looks for colors that are very similar to where you click. Because where I clicked in this was white, it looked for all the other colors around it that would be white as well and selected them. This continues until it reached the edge of the document here and this dark line. Because this dark line is not white, it stopped growing there. The magic wand tool is super useful for things other than white surfaces, and we'll see that a little bit later. Right now, I'm going to use the magic wand tool to make some selections because I want to color this in. I'm going to select the top of this crock, and I'm going to pick a color. I think this crock should be blue, and because it's near the top, I'm going to make it a light blue. Now it's time to fill it in. I'm first going to use the brush tool to do this. The brush tool can be found over here and has a shortcut of B. I want a brush that I can color this in fairly quickly. If my brush is too small, along the top, you'll see a circle and a drop-down arrow. This is where we can select the size of our brush, as well as how hard it is. Let me demonstrate. Notice how solid the difference between the blue to the white is along the edge of this brush. If I come up, I can adjust the hardness down, and I'll instead get a much more painterly or soft kind of like spray paint effect. Since I'm coloring this whole thing in, I'm not too worried about it. Notice as I'm coloring this in, even if I move my brush down here, it's not drawing down there because it's only going to draw where I have selected. It is now time to undo my selection, and you can go up to Select, Deselect, or notice the hotkey Control D. I'm going to be using Control D a lot. Going back up to my magic wand tool, I want to select something else so I can color the next section. When I hover over the magic wand tool, I've noticed that it says W right here. That means that's the hotkey for magic wand tool. I'm going to try that out. I'm going to press W on my keyboard. I'm going to select an area that I want to color next, and it's now selected. Now I can use the brush tool, which, if I hover over the brush tool, it's labeled as having a hotkey of B. I'm going to change my color a little bit, select my brush with the B key, and I'm going to paint in my next section. I'm going to deselect by remembering that the deselect button is Control D. It may seem like I'm asking you to remember a lot of hotkeys, but there are 3 things you're going to be doing a lot of, and by the end, those hotkeys will be burned into your memory. Let's color the next section. The magic wand tool can be selected with W, and I can select the next section. I want all of the holes in this crock to be the same color, and I don't really feel like coloring one in, clicking the next one, coloring the next in, clicking the next one. That's a lot. So this time I'm going to hold the Shift key when I click. The Shift key very often is kind of like saying and. So once I've clicked once, I hold the Shift key, it's like I'm saying, I want that, and this, and this, and this. Once I've selected everything, I can switch back to my brush tool, I can adjust my color, and then I can paint in. I'm going to deselect with Control D. That's looking pretty good. I'm going to use the magic wand tool again with a hotkey of W to select this section. Instead of painting this section, I'm going to use the paint bucket tool, and I'm going to fill it in with kind of a darker blue. The paint bucket tool can be found over along the left side. Sometimes it will be behind the gradient tool. If you click and hold, you can see that the gradient tool, the paint bucket tool, and the 3D material drop tool all share the same hotkey and section over here. But I want the paint bucket tool. With this section selected, the paint bucket tool works very simply by clicking in, and I can deselect. Let's make this a little more complicated. This sort of flat cell shading on my top croc looks pretty cool, but I want a gradient on my bottom croc. I'm going to use W to select where I want to place my gradient. I'm going to go to where my paint bucket tool is, but this time I'm going to choose the gradient tool. You have a foreground and a background color set over here. The gradient tool by default is going to try and draw a gradient from one color to the other. If you have them set to the default of black and white, it's going to draw a black and white gradient. The other thing that this tool is going to do is it's going to start and stop that gradient depending on where you start and stop dragging. My first click, when I start drawing this, that blue circle there is the very edge of the red and will be pure red. Wherever I lift up my mouse will be the very edge of the blue, and beyond that will be pure blue. But between the blue dot and where I've dragged will be the transition from red to blue. You can make that transition very small by drawing a small line. You can make that transition a lot more smooth by dragging a larger line. If I want most of my croc to be red with just a sliver of blue at the bottom, I will drag my gradient down on the bottom side. Let me show you a few more things about the gradient tool, which are neat. We can change the style of our gradient. We have a bunch of things you can click in here, which are kind of like pre-selected. So like if I want a pink gradient, I can come up, grab a pink gradient. Looks pretty good. But we can also change the shape of our gradient. I'm going to go grab a blue. So I'm kind of enjoying the way that looks. I'm going to try clicking one of these 5 things up here. With the one I just clicked, it's going to kind of make a pillar effect where it's going to go from one color, gradient to the middle, and then gradient back out to the first color. Or this one, that makes a kind of a spiral. Try these out. These can be really cool and give you really neat specific effects if that's what you're looking for. I'm going to switch back to the one that I had made, and I'm going to use that to color this one in. It's important to know that you can also drag the gradient beyond the area that you've selected. So this is me dragging inside versus me dragging outside. Pretty neat. Time for me to deselect with Control D. The next thing I want to show you is that we can do some other neat things with coloring. And I'm going to use a photograph to kind of give some more interesting stuff going on here. I have my picture already ready to go over here. And I'm going to right click, copy image, come back over here and paste. I don't want my rocks on top, so I'm going to move them to the bottom. I think this turtle shell would look really cool with a rock texture. I'm going to zoom in. We can zoom in by holding Alt and scrolling the scroll wheel. I'm going to select my magic wand tool with the W key, and I'm going to select. Notice that it did not fill exactly where I was expecting it to. I expected it to just fill this part of the turtle shell. The reason for that is because looking over the layer tab, I am on the wrong layer. I'm going to deselect, switch to the layer that I actually want, and there we go. I'm going to select a whole bunch of this turtle shell. Oop. All right. Notice suddenly I've got a whole bunch of other stuff. That's because I accidentally clicked one of the dark lines. I can undo that with the undo button or Control Z, and then resume holding Shift and clicking. To make the rock texture pass through, all I'm going to do is hit the delete key and then deselect. Scrolling back out, we can kind of get an idea of what that looks like. There's one more thing I want to show you about the Magic Wand tool, and I want to show you how you can kind of manipulate what it's grabbing. I'm going to use the gradient tool down here to give it as an example. When I click here, notice that it's not going too far. It's saying this red is very similar, but this red is not similar enough. If I wanted a little bit more of the red than I got, coming up here, I have options. We can change the tolerance. The bigger this number is, the more it will be able to vary in what color it grabs. Let's try 30 as a comparison. I'm going to deselect and then try clicking again. Notice this time how it grabbed more. If you set your tolerance super high, it won't look for edges and it'll just keep going. Let's click a different area. I selected this circle and this has a specific shade of blue which is matched in other areas. I've decided I don't like that shade of blue. So the next thing I'm going to do is show you how you can go up to the select menu and you can select similar. The reason why this failed is my tolerance is too high. This dark blue is so close to the black that when I said similar, it grabbed lots of the black around the page. I need to turn my tolerance down. I'm going to turn it down to 5. I'm going to deselect. And then I'm going to try clicking again. When I say select similar, this time I was able to only select the colors that I put in earlier. In this video, we learned how to use the Magic Wand tool, the brush tool, the paint bucket tool, the gradient tool, as well as chopping bits of our image off so we can make a wicked sweet coloring page.